Welcome. I'm Terry McGill, coming to you from Portland, Oregon. In the United States, if you're outside of it, don't recognize those terms. And this show, Who's Your Neighbor? This started right after COVID started a couple of years ago because I was reading Facebook stories more than I had been, like everybody else. And I began to notice that we need interaction, not through a screen. This is a pale substitute for connection, for intimacy, for connectedness. And that's what this show is about. And so I began to reconnect with people that I'd known, some for 25 years and somebody said, do you know about such and so? So I would reach out and say, would you like to be my guest or our guest? Because there's others in the background that help with this show. And tonight, I want to introduce you to someone that most of us are not like Oprah or Tony Robbins. Everybody doesn't know our name. And yet there are change makers. There are wonderfully supportive humans all around us, and we don't know our neighbors. So tonight, I'd like to introduce you to someone who, with internet, we're all global neighbors. So your neighbor tonight is Ann Richardson. And Ann, come on, please. Hello. There you are.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to be your neighbor and to be here for your audience. Thank you so much. Honored.
And I'm really so happy to connect with you. I've known about you. I've read some of your poetry on the web, but tonight I'm really looking forward to our chat. Just a little bit about you, like the detail stuff for our viewers. Ann has been a spiritual director and companion with a specialty in grief, and almost 8 years as a board-certified hospice chaplain. She's also an advanced labyrinth facilitator, certified. Poetry, wow, you should read her poetry. And this line really grabbed me. It's like, wow. These days, expanding into how to be in the world as one of many species and less human-centric. I've had that feeling, Ann, but I've never had the words for it. Would you say more about that?
Yeah, I'm very much a nature-based person. When I am out in nature and around trees and with the rain falling on me, which we had a lot of in Oregon, if I'm got my feet planted on the earth, then I can feel the land and the stories of the land and how the land stories me, that sense of belonging, that it's not about me. It's about something so much bigger. When I hear birds singing and you can hear the reverberations of the notes going through your body, you can have a conversation.
That's interesting that you would say it like that, because you just said that you feel the stories of the earth. Would you say more about that?
Yeah, somebody, a few years ago, I read a book called If Women Rose Rooted by Sharon Blackie, and that really brought it home for me.
What was the title again?
If Women Rose Rooted by Sharon Blackie. And, so much of our Western culture has us stuck in our head. We think all the time, and we don't drop into our body. We aren't embodied. And so we got away from the stories of the earth, and that the trees, the fungi, the leaves, the rivers, the waters, the oceans, the wind, they all have stories, the deer, their pathways. And so the land and a lot of more indigenous cultures they could listen to the stories, and they could see how say the prairie dogs, the way they dug their burrows and everything would churn up the dirt, and so they could tell when the seasons were changing, and they were more in tune with the way everything worked together in collaboration. We are not a solid being. We have biomes. We are very porous beings. So we are of the earth. We are not separate from the earth. And we got this idea that we are separate and above this land that we rest on. So we're all part of the story of this unfolding world around us. Yeah. And it's not just the Earth, of course, it extends out onto the galaxy. I mean, the James Webb Telescope, phenomenal. The pictures coming from that.
I've been fascinated for probably 25 or 30 years when I read something about when a butterfly flaps its wings in Borneo, there's a hurricane created in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing that started me connecting with the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't mind, how do you personally feel the stories of the earth?
So the best, an example I would have most recently is a few years ago, as I was processing my mother's decline from Alzheimer's, and I would walk, and there were this little grove of about 9 red leaf maples. No, anyway, maple trees, and they were in a circle, and they would hold this space, and they had a center, and they said, come, be in the center, and we will hold you. And after her death, they would just let me be there, and I put my hand on them. I could feel their pulse, and they would talk to me. They would talk to me. We'd have conversation, and I would watch them through the season, and they would just share their wisdom of what it's like to age, of what it's like to go through loss, of what it's like to come through the other side of a loss, and their wisdom. They were, you go to the redwoods, and the redwood forests are so old. Or I go to the Oregon coast and Cannon Beach, and everybody's familiar with Haystack Rock, but there are 2 other rocks adjacent. People call them the Needles, but I was down there a few years ago, and they looked at me and they said, "We're the guardians." They have their own soul. Every being has a soul, and these are very ancient souls. And so if we stop and we listen, these other beings will talk with us, and they will convey their wisdom. But we have to slow way down, way down.
That's been my experience also. I used to think that people were just a little crazy, maybe, if they said that trees or rocks spoke to them.
Mm-hmm.
But I met a shaman, actually before she went to Peru and became a real shaman, a full-blooded or full-bagged one. And every pebble spoke to her. And I knew her. I was a realtor, and I was helping her prepare her house for sale. And so I got to know her fairly well. And she wasn't crazy. And it really opened me up. And so I've learned too, as you mentioned, that everything has a soul. How would you language it for our viewers to open more to non-human centric souls?
Mm-hmm. If they can, and not everybody's in a place or physically able. It's really important to be aware that we all have physical abilities in our bodies. But if you can, to go out and just lay on the earth. Just lay on the earth. Listen to the hum of the earth.
Even when it's raining.
Yeah, it might be a little harder when it's raining. But if you can, or just walk barefoot on the earth, or go outside, just listen, let the rain fall on your face, and just start small noticings. Or if you're If you're in a city and there's not a lot of opportunity to be on the bare earth, find small things. Um, it might be just a small patch of grass in a busy city, or it might be your small deck and you have a plant. Maybe you just have a house plant. You don't have a lot of opportunity to be in a, we're in the Pacific Northwest. We're just blessed with such an expanse of beauty and greenery and wilderness. But not every place is like that. So you find your opportunity, just breathing in the air. Air is the wind. That's all element. That's all part of your weatherscape and your landscape. So that's all part of it. Hearing a bird sing. What is in that bird song? The notes. Some people are auditory. Some people are, sensate through tactile. So ask yourself, what's your way of taking in information? And then find that as your doorway in. So if you're auditory, listen to the sound. If you're sensate, find a small tree or a twig or a bit of moss and just touch it. Just touch it and say, what might you want to say to me? Yeah, those kind of things.
So what I'm hearing you say is, number one, we have to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, we have to refocus, shift our attention somewhere else,
Yeah,
and then open up.
right. Yeah, and it'll take time if you're not used to doing it. And people look at you a little odd. I mean, I have these trees, and I go up to them and I put my hands on them, and they walk by and they think, yeah. I wrote a poem. I wrote a poem once called "How to Make Love to a Tree."
So we have to get over our own conditioning then.
Mm-hmm.
What do people think about me?
Mm-hmm.
I've found for myself that's been huge in my life. I'm still working with it. So even putting a hand on a tree or stopping and just listening to a bird.
Mm-hmm. And if you say you have your own garden, or this idea of like taking our lawns out and putting in wildflowers and putting in naturescapes, or if you do have to take a tree out, offer it thanks and gratitude for what is offered you. Or if you have a tree come down in a windstorm, thank it for all that is offered and the life that will continue through it, whether you have to chip it because it's dangerous or whether you let it rot, because there's a lot of life left in that tree even as it rots and creates more life in its decomposting. So yeah, and just know that there's so much wisdom. Just because we don't know the language that's being spoken, that we have this oral and written language, doesn't mean there's not language going on in communication between the birds and the dolphins and the whales. We just don't know their language.
So I'm reflecting on your penchant or deeper for walking labyrinths.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I'm wondering if there's a combination going on there. You're feeling the earth, but what else is there with the labyrinth?
Labyrinth is a very ancient archetype. It's interpreted currently, and archetypes are things that have been given to us from beyond. Jung would say they are in our collective conscious, but we haven't made them up as humans. They've been given to us. The archetype of the labyrinth has resurfaced in maybe the last 100 years as something to help us with our journey. For me, it's strongly calling to me as something of the earth, journey with the earth. So I have a strong sense right now that I need to move out of this apartment that sits up off the ground to buy a home and put a labyrinth on the earth for people to walk. It is a spiral. Here's an example of one. This is called the classic. Almost looks like a brain, kind of based on the chakras, if anyone's familiar with the chakras. That's based on a spiral, which is one of the most basic mm, uh, uh, designs in nature, right? It's the spiral. And as you walk it, a labyrinth in general, if you're walking them for meditation or just to unwind, or for grief, I use the labyrinth a lot in my grief work, is your busy mind gets focused on putting your foot on the path, and then your unconscious mind can then start to unwind and connect with what's going on outside of yourself.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then
So,
there's studies done on that too.
so there's two aspects of the labyrinth I'm thinking. One is when you're going in, and the other when you're coming out.
Mm-hmm.
There's some meaning to those.
That is one way. There's, of course, many ways to work with the labyrinth, and this is the other main style people will see. Oops, there we go. There, and that's more the medieval one that people have heard out, that were put in churches back about the 12th, 13th, and 14th century, and that is you definitely do walk towards the center and then walk back out. The idea being that on the way in, you release anything that you may be holding on to. Great for grief work, because oftentimes people have things they want to maybe let go of a loved one. They need to maybe let go of some anxiety or some concerns around their loved one. In the center, you receive. So if you have a spiritual tradition or a faith tradition, maybe you need to receive something or let go of something in the center to give it to that particular tradition or that particular source that's meaningful for you. The way back out is then how you would integrate that back out into your journey, back out into the world. Now, that's one way to do it. Sometimes we're not ready to let go of those things, so you don't have to do it those ways. But that's one way to work with the labyrinth. I mean, grief or any kind of processing kind of.
So you mentioned grief and processing,
Mhm.
and that's something that you do professionally.
Yeah. So my training originally, I originally trained as a spiritual director, and then I was called into chaplaincy. So I trained as a board certified chaplain, worked in hospice for close to 8 years, and then I stepped out of that shortly after my mother died, or well, shortly before, but as she was declining with her Alzheimer's, and then I stepped back into spiritual direction and companionship. And to clarify what that is, so I'm not a counselor. That's a therapist, is different. What I do is I sit and listen deeply to people's stories. I'm trained in this profession of spiritual companionship. I oftentimes people don't have anyone that will listen deeply to their story. My belief, my philosophy, and my training being that if people are given option to hear their own story, they will hear their own truth, they find their own way. That doesn't mean I don't offer something. I may offer a poem and see if a line resonates. We may do a collage together. We may talk about a movie they had seen or something along those lines. I'll mirror words back to them. It's not that I don't offer anything, but I never tell someone what to do. I never tell someone what to believe. So I meet with people across all different faith traditions, spiritual beliefs, or none, no beliefs, no particular faith beliefs at all. So they can find the meaning themselves. So when people come to me in, say, fresh grief, say, a loss of a spouse or a child, I mean, they don't need fixing. They just need a place to lament, to sit with that deep, deep sorrow. I call grief my mentor. Grief is my mentor. And I am always an apprentice to what I'm learning. Grief teaches me daily. Grief teaches me daily. It's another archetype, I think, like the labyrinth. It's been around forever as part of our condition. I used to say our human condition, but I really see other beings also grieve horses, whales, trees, grief.
I read a story several years ago. What do they call it? The old barbed wire fences, they call them heritage fences here in Oregon, maybe elsewhere. And one of the, excuse me, I'm really reacting to listening to you. My voice is telling me that. The people who lived on this land, this acreage that used to have been fenced off, there were wild horses that went through there. And this man was up walking, it's down southern Oregon. He saw one of the wild horses caught in barbed wire. It had almost taken its leg completely off because it had been there for 2 or 3 days trying to get loose and couldn't. And there was nothing that he could do at that point. There were wild horses, you have to be careful. And there were other horses around watching. And then, another couple of days, and that horse died. And he went back up there and he saw the stallion, the leader of that whole herd, standing next to the horse that had just died. And it was like it was talking to this transitioned horse body soul. And it moved him deeply, and me and a bunch of other people who read that story were so moved. That opened me up. You spoke earlier about non-human centric, and I've been opening to that. It's so deep.
Yeah, I think we can remember the story of maybe 2 or 3 years ago about the mother cat whale off the coast of Pacific Northwest that lost her calf, and it was several days, maybe a couple of weeks, that she just kept going back and forth with her calf, mourning that loss.
I remember that.
Yeah, so we have a lot of hubris when we think that we're the only ones that can mourn, that we're the only ones that are important. Yeah.
And there are birds and animals that mate for life. And that's something, when I first became aware of it, it's like, really? There's so much more than we know about everything.
Yeah. The brain-heart soul connection, that whole, how we're all connected. Very fascinating. I have a poem that kind of talks about that grief that I feel of our world, that nature connection, the grief, and I'll just share that with you. It's called After the Apocalypse. Excuse me for humming a little louder to fill in for the missing birds. The morning air begging for a response. Me, off pitch, foraging for notes. Now forgetting their songs. Remind me to search the archives for sheet music. And excuse them for leaving this world and nesting on a distant orb, with canopies stretching over promise and tangles of grass rife with notes that someday may travel back to us. Quotas of grays to be pulled from the wreckage of our indifference.
And where might someone find that poem so they could sit with it?
That one was, I'll have to send you the link. It was on, that one actually was accepted and is in the Tiny Seed Journal.
What's the second word? Tiny what?
Tiny Seed, SEED. Tiny Seed Journal. And I can't remember the day it was, but if they type that in, I think they could find it.
And they could also, could they also connect with you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to send that one to them.
And there we go. So Anne's webpage is nurtureyourjourney.net. And then her email, of course, would be ann@nurtureyourjourney.net. Thank you so much for offering to share that and for sharing it with us. And here's your Facebook page. And it's facebook.com/nurtureyourjourney.net. And Instagram @nurtureyourjourney. Now, dear my listeners, if you haven't got it yet, this is Nurture Your Journey.
That's me. I do believe in nurturing the journey.
Yeah, I have a friend that knows you that feels very nurtured, and I'm grateful for that too. So, with the nurturing that you can do as a companion, that's a term that I never knew of anyone who did that professionally. Mm-hmm. But you do that? You offer that?
Yeah. Actually, the idea of spiritual direction companionship is quite ancient. It came out of several traditions. It's probably most well known in the Catholic tradition originally, as the what do they call them? Not the monks, but the young servants would come up. Not servants, but not Catholics, so I can't remember all the names. Anyway, would come up. They need that tutoring and their spiritual formation to help with their spiritual formation. But it's gotten much wider acceptance now. So I belong to Spiritual Directors International, which covers all faith traditions, and it's been around for many years, about 40, 50 years now. But anyway, our goal is to just, we have therapists, psychotherapists, we have medical doctors and that, but who's there to help sit with you on your spiritual journey, to deeply listen, whether you're in grief or whether you're just at a crossroads in your life and you're kind of like, well, I'm not quite sure what's going on, and I'm in a transition point. I'm in a liminal space or at a threshold or transition, or I'm deeply in part of my faith community, but I just want someone else to come alongside me on this journey that's maybe not part of my church, because I have some intimate things I want to talk about, some questions I don't feel comfortable talking about it with someone in my church, because maybe they sound a little off, and I don't feel comfortable talking to that person, or I've been part of this tradition for a long time and I'm feeling a little. I have some beautiful questions, as David White calls them, beautiful questions, and I'm feeling that maybe that's not the right place. So I want a spiritual companion to just listen as I explore them. So we help people with exploration or with sitting in the sorrow or the lament. We don't fix things. We come alongside in the sacred. It's really when I trained, as I did my training as a chaplain, and the chaplain is very, very similar to they don't fix things. Sometimes we have, as a spiritual companion, if someone has a specific faith tradition, they want specific prayers or things in their tradition, and that's what I'm trained for. Obviously, I provide that too. But chaplains are also in that position. If you ask for a chaplain, if you're in the hospital or something, they should be meeting your needs where you are. They don't proselytize, and a spiritual companion doesn't either. We meet you in your space.
Say that again for me in a different way.
Okay. So a spiritual companion will come alongside you, and this would be the same for a chaplain, because I always like to get this word out there too. So a lot of times people are at the hospital and they say, would you like a chaplain? And they'll say, well, no, I don't need someone to come in here and tell me what to believe. So chaplains and spiritual companions, directors it's an old word, because we don't direct you. We don't tell you which way to go. At least I don't. is we're not in the position we shouldn't be. Someone hasn't been properly trained if they tell you what to believe or what you should be doing. No shoulding, right? Offer invitations, areas for exploration. But if someone's not ready to go somewhere, or if they're feeling fragile, it's just about holding a gentle, kind space for somebody. I always say I can never know someone's entire story, the story of their ancestors, the story that was the story of the lands they were living on, back and back and back. I can never know the complete stories. I often say with somebody as I listen deeply, and I always say I'm not the one in the room either, the only one in the room. When I prepare for a session, I sit and I do Reiki, and I ask those I consider my guides to come and be present with me, the guides of whoever I'm meeting with, so I can get out of my own way. Not that I'm always perfect, but to get out of my own way and then to check in. And I'll say to somebody, so this is what I'm sensing. I kind of pull the threads together of the story. And I say, but don't take what I'm saying as right. Listen to yourself. Listen to your own intuition. If it doesn't sound right, that's okay. Don't take what I say as gospel, right? Listen to yourself, right?
So is that why you reflect back to them?
Mm-hmm. Right. Or I may notice something like today. I notice, your energy seems very low, or I'm noticing you're wearing a particular color, and you don't usually wear that color. I'm just wondering if there's a story behind that. No, okay, just noticing. So, so it can go many different ways, and as you develop a relationship, you can notice some things, but it's always different every time too. Yes, you have a history, and yes, every session is new, if that makes sense. Because we're new every day, and time is mushy. Time is very mushy, I would say.
And this has been fascinating. And I know we could keep on talking about corvids and other things, but we've, really come to a closing time. And I want to thank you so much for sharing yourself, your perspective, your experiences, your wisdom, knowledge. I am just so appreciative of you taking some time out of your life to share with others.
Well, Terry, well, thank you, Terry. I know you offer many of your gifts to the world too, and you're just a shining light to many. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and let me be here, because I guess I get really excited about this stuff. So I get excited about grief. What can I say? Because I always say, if you're willing to go on your grief journey, your life will expand with joy also.
So could I just reflect this back to you?
Yeah.
When you say you're excited about grief, my sense is that that's like, if they're willing, that's an open door to connection, to intimacy, to, I started to say support, but maybe not, or at least not the way that one normally thinks, well, I need to support them, but rather the support of being heard.
Mm-hmm. And then to joy, expanded joy.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry.
So I'm Terry McGill. That was Ann Richardson. This is Who's Your Neighbor? And if you'd like a copy of the poem, just replay this or scroll back or look and see if we managed to put it into the, what's it called, banners. And until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for connecting. And I hope you'll connect again.